Joe Lonsdale was a co-founder of Palantir, and he has since founded a number of extremely successful multi-billion-dollar companies. He is a courageous voice. He always speaks out for what he believes in and has been an extremely positive and influential force in policy and in politics. He's my first cousin, and we kind of kick off this interview with a disagreement about the name of our show, Where Madness Lies.
Hi, I'm Joe Lonsdale. Welcome to American Optimist. I'm just kidding. Where Madness Lies.
Do you now understand the meaning of the show?
That's a good font.
But do you like the name of the show? It's okay. You can have it out.
The name of the show is not a bad name. It's possible to have things that are amazing and that are competent in the world without them being like crazy or mad or anything like that. Like I think there's like it's like this like poetic thing where it's kind of fun to assume that like greatness only comes from madness, but I don't actually believe that. I mean, I'm not like totally normal, but I can actually do amazing things without having to be crazy, and that's okay, you know?
I also think that you're not insane. I wouldn't call you an actual crazy person, but I think that the madness, because this comes from Don Quixote, right? This comes from the book Don Quixote by Cervantes. And the idea is that there was this guy that was chasing windmills in the name of nobility, in the name of justice, in the name of all these things, and people thought he was insane to do so.
The whole point is that they were mocking him for tilting windmills, and it's like not a good thing to do. You don't want to go around tilted windmills. You want to actually like I'm actually working really hard on changing things and fixing things, not because I'm crazy, but because I can actually and have incremental progress that we're making along with the really big goals.
But who mocked him? He's a fictional character.
But the point is that he was mad.
But he inspired people in the real world to take the critiques that they were getting and yet still continue on and actually fight for the things that they believed in.
If I was going to have like a mad romantic figure, I'd much prefer Cyrano de Bergerac, because at least he was like mad in like an honorable way where he was trying to fight a fight even if he couldn't win. And that was really noble. Whereas Don Quixote was mad because he was attacking something that didn't even exist. And that's not, and that it's a more of a mockery of things than it is like a noble thing.
But then why did John Adams carry a copy of Don Quixote everywhere he went with him during the Revolutionary War?
There weren't so many good books around back then available for Americans.
Why did Dostoevsky, one of the greatest writers of all time, reportedly sleep with a copy of Don Quixote under his pillow?
There was probably another metaphor in there that I'm missing then.
Yes, there's another metaphor in there that you're missing, because people made fun of you and called you mad and insane and chasing windmills when you guys started Palantir. They called you crazy when you started UATX. They still are.
But Don Quixote was mad.
That's not the point.
But it is the point, because you want things that are actually functional.
You know, but it's the spirit of Don Quixote.
See, this is you as a poet versus me as like focused purely on like competence here. It's different.
I think that you represent the positive madness that is the theme of that story almost better than anyone else I've ever met in my life.
I'll take the compliment. I appreciate that.
Because obviously you're not chasing windmills. You're not a crazy person. But you're starting UATX. Everyone's insanely critical of you. Like, there's still people online calling you a grifter for some reason, as though this is some like grifting scheme, even though it's cost you a ton of money and a ton of your time.
It's very expensive to start universities, yes, especially nonprofit ones.
Aren't you paying? What's your plan to pay for the first class all the way through, right?
Yeah, the first 100 students are getting 4-year scholarships. We're also giving on top of that scholarships to a lot of the best students beyond just free tuition. So yes, universities are very expensive to start.
People would call what you did with UATX a quixotic quest. They would claim that it's a little bit delusional. And yet it's working, and yet it's succeeding, and yet it's changing the world. That's kind of my point. And we can move on from this. I understand what you're saying, and I think that you kind of understand what I'm saying.
I appreciate where you're coming from, and there's definitely some quixotic quests out there, or at least they appear to be that to those who don't fully understand them. So maybe there was some genius inside of Don Quixote is the point that we were missing.
Yeah, and Elon Musk is building companies to go to Mars and stuff. People call that lunacy and insanity, and it's world-changing. Okay, anyways. And it's kind of connected to the name of your show, which is called The American Optimist. So why did you start that show? And what does it mean to you to be an American optimist?
Well, I think it's not a good idea to bet against America and bet against our society. I think it's still the best set up society in the world, and I think it still has the underlying principles and values, even though there's lots of things wrong with it we need to fix. You know, I think it's a lot easier to be a cynic. Whenever we talk about something on my Twitter, I think today we were showing off the debt. Our friend Buttigeg was showing off the debt's way too high, and I commented on this, and Elon agreed, you know, we need to cut spending, we need to stop wasting all this money. And so, of course, because he agrees, like, you get thousands of people starting to comment on it, and you have this certain archetype of, especially like young men right now, where they're just like, yeah, it's all broken anyway. Even if you were to stop spending, be out of money. Like that's not true. Actually, covering the debt's only like it's a big part of our budget, but it's not our full budget. If we weren't if we stop spending, we wouldn't be out of money at all. We can actually very much stop the spending. We very much fix the problems. And everyone's just cynical and pessimistic and likes to paint why everything's broken. There's a whole set of people like, yeah, the people in charge are just evil and they're just stealing all of the money. And no, it's more like that they're incompetent, and it's more like they don't realize that, of course, there's some of them are corrupt and some of them are unfortunate biases in the wrong directions, but a lot of them just don't realize how to be competent enough to get everything done while spending like a reasonable amount of money. Like, there's very good solutions here. It requires competence. It requires being optimistic enough to know you can solve it and then working with smart people to solve it.
Teddy Roosevelt, who was also inspired by Don Quixote, had a very similar view to that. He actually had a huge amount of disdain for cynical sort of attitudes about America and for people who at that time were claiming that America's best days were behind it. And so while we're right now faced with a really, really seemingly dark set of circumstances, you're saying, no, actually, our best days are still ahead of us.
I mean, there's like really good answers to all the problems facing us. If we just had a few smarter people in charge with a little bit of courage, we could solve everything. Yes.
You make it sound simple, but actually getting there is complex and difficult.
Well, everyone's a wimp right now. Everyone's, there's always special interests. They're very powerful. Most people in charge are cowards. There's like all these things where it's like pretty obvious. You could, there's about 8 million people working around DC. I think over 2 million of them are employed by the government, but there's, several million consultants. And, we probably need to cut at least a third of them. I think we can cut 2/3, but we can cut at least a third of them. It wouldn't be that hard to do it. We need to be bold to do that. And there's not that many bold men in public life these days. We need more bold, women as well, but we need more bold people in public life.
Yeah, your optimism isn't only focused on the real world. You love science fiction. Specifically, I know you're a huge Star Trek fan. There's sort of like a more techno-optimist kind of angle to the Star Trek universe.
There's something called the Next Generation series, which is, there's something really optimistic about the late 1980s, 1990s, where you basically, it was really clear that society was advancing, technology was getting to a really good place, and they kind of envisioned this world that's like almost a post-racial world. We're not fighting over stupid things anymore. It's like you should have diversity to enrich things, but you don't have like all these like weird unnecessary conflicts. And unfortunately, I think the more modern version of all these TV shows has gone back into something a little bit more cynical. But yeah, I think Next Generation was this really interesting, optimistic kind of discovery mode thing where you go out into the universe and discover and explore science and explore cool things.
You're a huge Patrick Stewart fan as well. And I know you recently...
Patrick Stewart's a wonderful actor. Yes.
And you recently read his biography, which you were all about for like a week.
He's a really compelling guy. His politics are completely different than mine, by the way, which I deeply respect because he has just a totally different perspective on the world of where he came from, and I think it's really interesting seeing where he came from and what he's done.
Given that's where the late 1980s science fiction stuff was, do you think that technology has actually been additive, that it's actually improved the quality of life? There are some that would say that technology has only helped the most competent among us, and that for the vast majority of us, this technology that's been created for the lowest common denominator has actually lessened spirituality, has made people bigger addicts to worse behaviors.
I think talking about technology as a whole is kind of silly to do because you're talking about thousands of different things, right? You have various types. You have technology. In general, most of the technology, if like this probably been created, it's probably been in just various industries and various subparts of industries that are esoteric and would be weird to talk about here. But most of what it's done is it's made things more efficient and more productive. And so you've lowered prices. So you've had a very disinflationary effect from technology the last 30 years, which has, very much raised living standards for a lot of people. Now, on the other hand, you have things that have lowered their living standards, which is, if you want to talk about things in the U.S., it's important. There's like things are cheaper thanks to technology and productivity and globalization. But then you have the working class, didn't maybe have as many good jobs because of competition from globalization. And you have really stupid rules that made housing more expensive. And so you have all sorts of like kind of different forces. You have healthcare and education, which are way overregulated and broken, have become more expensive, even though everything else is getting cheaper. So you have all this kind of, it's a complicated discussion. And, overall, yes, innovation is used by humans, is a good thing overall. Now, of course, probably the most controversial and most complicated one of these is how our media has evolved. Media, to me, is like this really weird category of the world that doesn't really respond to markets and innovation the same way as everything else. Like in most industries, like you're buying something, you want to buy a car, you want to buy a microphone, whatever it is, you want to make a better car, a better microphone, you're going to make it cheaper, you're going to make it better, people are going to buy it, that's great, right? It's like a better TV, TV's going to get cheaper, buy it, that's great. Media is very weird because the incentives in media is to kind of like addict you in different ways. It's to kind of shock you into seeing it. For a long time, we had a kind of a healthy media environment, or at least somewhat healthy, where everyone subscribed to something, so at least they could invest a lot of money into making it a legit thing. But now we're kind of back to the yellow journalism of 100 years ago with the way social media works. And the incentives are basically like to be a drug that addicts you and screws you up. So no, media technology disaster compared to other areas of technology.
I know you have lifelong libertarian leanings. Recently, we don't have to go too deep into this. You've been very public about how you want to limit the way that foreign countries are able to have companies like TikTok in our country. What did you think of DeSantis' bill with regard to limiting or restricting social media for people under the age of 14?
I think it's really good to experiment with new ideas in the States. Definitely pro-liberty overall. At the same time, you can be pro-liberty without wanting to give heroin to teenagers, right? And the reason I use heroin as the example here is I think there's something very analogous in terms of how a lot of social media works, in terms of how it's hijacking dopamine pathways in our minds. We don't know what happens to young children when you get them addicted to these types of drugs. And they really are. They really do seem to me to be a type of drug. To use whatever machine learning or AI we're using is a new form of drug that's getting people addicted to these things. I think states choosing not to have kids exposed to that, I think that's a very fair thing, and I think we should test these things and learn. And I'm not going to have my kids on social media, so I understand why Florida passed that rule.
Yeah, I know. Recently, we were talking about Jonathan Haidt's book. What learnings did you have from either reading his book or going to some of his talks recently?
Well, The Anxious Generation is a great book. Yeah, I've been a huge fan of Jonathan Haidt for a long time. That's his book. It just came out, and there's a few things there. One of the ones that was really kind of interesting to me is that I think they said the kids between the age of 9 and 15 really adapt to their social milieu. So there's a study where kids from Japan who came to the U.S., if they went back to Japan after they were already 15, they never really readjusted and felt Japanese. Especially back then, Japan was a very different culture. It is now too, but it's even more different 50 years ago. And so there's something about in your mind to just get set around like what the world is and how it works. And the way people kind of work in these virtual worlds is there seems to be like they get very, very good at like having their brain quickly learn how to there's two things you do in socially. You basically like try to copy and be like others, and you try to follow what's prestigious. And learning that from the virtual world is obviously very, very poisonous. And so I think there's something that's like permanently socially screwed up for kids like being raised in a virtual world from 9 to 15. And then in general, like there's just lots of different studies around this that he's done that I think are quite convincing that he's citing, where it does seem that the mental health issues are tied to the social media stuff. And then there was lots of arguments against that previously that people were making 10 years ago. And he's gone through all of those arguments pretty well and said, no, it's pretty clear this is actually really bad for these young preteens. And so the evidence, as I see it right now, is I would not want my preteens and teens on social media.
I think it's extremely telling how most young people would completely agree with what you just said. And even the kids who are currently in high school who are addicted to social media would probably agree that their lives would be better off if everyone was off social media.
That's the problem, is they feel like they have to be on it for social reasons. So I think in order to do this, you have to have a school where all the families agree that the young teens are not on it.
You have to have community buy-in. And you have to have parents that do the uncomfortable thing of being more active in their kids' lives. And it's harder. And it's harder for us to be that way. But in order to help our kids at least have a healthier relationship with this social media heroin, as you called it, we're going to have to do our best.
This is my secret concern about things like Neurolink long term, by the way, which is I wonder if there's an analogous challenge. And who knows? Like, obviously, Neuralink is something I'm very bullish and positive on because it's going to help, quadriplegics be able to walk again, hopefully. There's all sorts of amazing positive things with that technology. But you can imagine a world where, like, some technology you could hook up to your brain and all of a sudden you could do your work, like, 5 times better. And in some ways, that creates more value for the world. It's really, really good. But it probably also creates all sorts of weird, different issues. And then if other people are doing it, you kind of have to do it too. Otherwise, you don't fit in. Otherwise, you're not going further along. So I think technology I'm generally bullish on overall. But there are these kind of weird things on the boundaries of our humanity that are a little bit scary to figure out.
That's fair and actually really interesting. What specifically do you imagine could be a scary thing? What eccentric sort of thing could we adopt if we all use Neuralink?
Well, you basically become a new species, right? Because you're no longer just a human. You're some form of cyborg. You're going to have something interacting at some point. Now, and again, this is not a criticism of Neuralink as it stands right now. This is very important.
Decades down the line.
Yeah, I think Neuralink right now is very, very positive. But some version of the man-machine interface eventually, if it's getting to be like super high throughput, back and forth, is effectively a new species. Does it drive you mad in some ways? Does it bias you in different directions? Does it change your nature of your humanity? And of course, maybe that could be a really positive thing, and people shouldn't, I guess you say you shouldn't be like speciesist against cyborgs or something like that. But if it like totally fundamentally changes what it means to be human, and it's the only thing you have to do in order to compete in certain areas, it's a strange future world.
The way you just talked about it, that reveals a part of you that I think a lot of people that don't know you aren't familiar with, which is you have a sort of childlike wonder for the world, and you kind of get excited about really cool new ideas. What's the last thing that you've been in absolute awe of?
Absolute awe is a strong word.
Yeah, but you get excited about things. I've seen you giddy over you're like a kid.
Well, last week we were looking at a bunch of the new graphical models, and I think it is really fun what these graphical models could do. Because you talk about LLMs on words, but you have same models on pixels, and somehow they're able to figure out all this stuff around depth and everything really easily. But there's crazy things. Like you could take a restaurant menu, and you could tell it to turn it into an Excel file, and then turn it back into the restaurant menu, and just describe what type of menu you want. And it could do a super creative, much better graphic design than almost any graphic designer with a whole new menu with the exact same substance that it had from the old menu. So you could take basically there'll be no excuse anymore to have any sign or any menu or anything you're interacting with other people with. There's no excuse not to do it in an A+ way graphically, because that's just going to be a snap of your fingers with these new models, with the substance correct, which is just, I think there's really fun stuff like that coming up. I don't know.
Even the way you talk about that reveals sort of this excitement and joy you have for new things. A lot of people, as they age and especially as they become successful, I've noticed that people lose that excitement.
Well, this is optimism versus cynicism again, right? I think optimism is about still exploring the world and still being excited about what you can find and being positive. One of the other things in the Jonathan Haidt book you were asking about is people have their kind of discover mode and they have their safety defend mode. Any baby, we both have kids, will be exploring, will encounter something dangerous or hurt, and they'll cry and they'll be back into the defend mode. But psychologically, we all have in our lives, are we exploring or are we defending and being safe? Cynicism is a little bit more tied to the defend mode. It's more tied to safetyism, right? And so a lot of people, they've just had so many things attack them, so many things hurt them, so many things turn out badly, and they're frustrated, they don't trust people, and they're just really sad because then they're stuck in defend mode. And I mean, I've had a lot of people really let me down. I've had a lot of things go really negatively, but part of being a good leader and part of actually, I think, having a positive outlook on the world is you have to get past that defend mode and you have to go to explore and discover mode again. You have to be excited about the world.
The reason why the people go to a defend mode is because we probably evolved that way. The vast majority of our ancestors had to be that way in order to avoid predators.
We evolved out both though, right? You have to have defend mode, especially if you're smaller, especially if you're young, especially if you're weaker. This is why it's important to be strong. No, it's actually really important. This is a huge difference in the world that's extremely controversial. There's a different role that you play on average by gender and on average by a strong man versus someone who's not strong in terms of being confident and being an explorer and being in discover mode. And it's much easier to be that. And this is absolutely true. This is there's psychological studies on this. It's a totally different reaction to how you deal with things in the world. I'll tell you one of the most important versions of this. When you are putting out an expression about something, what you believe or that you think or that you want to happen, are you doing it based on your actual views, which is the explore, discover kind of open mode, or are you doing it based on what you think others want you to say? And the vast majority of the time, if you're in defend mode, you are saying what other people want you to say, which is why the political expressions and the virtue signaling, and it's why it differs by gender. It's why it differs by what people call alpha versus kind of the weaker men. It's very different. If you have a strong man who's saying what he actually believes, he's much less likely to go along with virtue signaling bullshit, which is ruining our country. And this is a real thing right now.
I know you've been critiquing me about my physique as of late, so I'll start working out a little more. But I think you know me well enough to know that I'm probably, maybe to a fault, too unfiltered. And I often am in explore mode with my conversations.
You are definitely in explore mode too and getting in trouble too, and that's great. That's healthy, and that's what we should be. And by the way, this is something women can do, something men can do, and it's something that's very healthy for our country. It's unfortunate right now. It's skewed in a direction where people are very afraid. You see these videos of these young people. People will go up and ask them how many genders are there, and they're just 100% in defend mode, freaking out. And if their friend violates that, they're like, no, stop, and they're terrified, right? It's really sad. We have this kind of really broken situation there right now.
Your dad is one of the best people I know in this regard. Uncle Joe. He is.
Yes. By best, you mean he was oftentimes not filter himself enough. But yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, he's completely unfiltered.
Yes.
And he's so sincere. And he's
in discover mode.
he's always in discover mode. He probably played a huge influence on you guys.
He's a very loving person. He's a very caring person. And yes, he will offend people a lot of all sorts of different backgrounds.
But in a loving and caring way.
Exactly.
He has the biggest heart of all time.
Yeah.
He got you into chess when you were a kid. Do you remember your first chess experiences?
Yeah, my very first ones were watching him play when I was maybe 2 or 3 years old, I remember. And then when he realized I actually had figured it out, he sat down and taught me, and we got pretty serious about it.
That's like Ender's Game type stuff right there. So you were 3, and my son is 3.5, and the idea of him learning chess is
if he was watching you for hours every night, after a few months, I bet he'd pick it up too. Aiden seems like a bright kid.
I'll start to play it in front of him and see what happens.
Well, you have to play good chess. It wouldn't work for you, Aaron. I'm sorry.
I play okay chess.
Just kidding.
Come on, I know the chopped liver opening, right? Isn't that what it's called? Your dad has a really funny story about how you beat his brother or one of his friends
Probably one of his brothers. My dad was one of 8 kids. He had 5 brothers.
You were 4 years old and you challenged his brother and you were able to beat him or something?
Pretty sure my dad challenged him on my behalf. But yeah, listen, it turns out 4 or 5-year-olds could be pretty good little chess players if they practice enough. And chess is one of those things where if you're practicing enough, like a young person could be an old person and really surprise them.
In preparing for this interview, I watched your interview with Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, for your podcast.
One of my favorite people.
He said something that we all know to be true. For the people that know you, you're an extremely loyal person.
Sometimes to a fault. I think I've not replaced certain CEOs sometimes when I should have sooner. So I'm still learning how to get this right.
I do think that you are loyal to a fault, but I do think the trade-off, because you haven't gotten it right, you have so many people that are in your corner that go to bat for you.
That came from my dad in a lot of ways, right? So I think one of the most important things my dad taught us is to really take pleasure in the success of your brothers and your friends. I have 2 little brothers, and obviously, if people around you are succeeding, that reflects so well on you, and it's something if you actually take joy from, as my dad does, it makes you a lot happier. And then I think that just turns out to have all these really cool knock-on effects because you can't really fake being happy about someone else's success. You can briefly do it maybe, but people can kind of tell if they've been around you for long enough. So I think it's a really healthy thing to do for everyone.
Your dad tells a really cool story about you when you were in the 1st grade, I think, with regards to one of your first friends that you're still friends with to this day and who was one of the first engineers at Palantir, with Eric Lin. Do you remember how you met him?
Well, I met him in 1st grade.
You came home and were complaining this kid was better at math than you.
Yes, he was better at math than me. I don't know. Was that something I was complaining about? I remember him teaching us fractions where we'd go in during recess when other kids were out. And I did play some balls and stuff during recess too, but we came in and he taught us math during recess, which I really enjoyed. Eric went on to get, I think, almost all A+ at Caltech, and also a really good guy.
So the way your dad tells the story is that you came home and you had always thought you were the smartest person in your class and the best person at math, and that you came home and you told him, there's this guy, Eric, and he's better at math than me. And your dad said something like, well, you better make sure he's your best friend then. And you guys have remained, I mean, I know you're still friends with all of your childhood friends, that you were that core group of guys. You guys still hang out. You guys still go on trips and stuff together. That's actually really interesting because that theme has played throughout your entire life with everything you've built. And you kind of have this like loyal group of people that you kind of assemble around every single project you work on.
My favorite story about Eric is that I was behind him in line in 2nd grade and the line was lasting for too long and he had some suspenders on and I had these long strings on my shorts and I ended up tying my strings with like 10 knots to his suspenders to the point where we were completely stuck together, and then we both got in trouble for it because the teacher couldn't get us apart. Sorry. Anyway,
that's really cute.
Yeah. It makes me. You probably shouldn't punish our kids too much when they do ridiculous things.
Thanks for having Aiden's back. That's really nice of you. So your dad ended up helping you form a chess team at the school during that age range, right?
The way the chess tournaments work at the state and national level is they count the top 4 scores from the team. So you play different rounds, each independently, and then you add up the top 4 scores from your team. So you train together, you teach each other, and it's kind of interesting because as you get to the very end of the tournament, you have to have the top score to win. So you say, oh, all I need to do is draw this game, and I'll win no matter what. So sometimes you can coordinate that way too and stuff. But you're playing separate games. But yeah, so our team was very competitive. We won the state a bunch of years in a row, won the nationals together a little bit. So it was fun.
But you were always kind of like a patient person with people that were maybe less competent.
I think it's good to be patient with people, but impatient with like agencies and institutions and processes and things that are broken.
And lines. You hate standing in lines.
Just anything that's like unnecessarily wasting time or suboptimal, you should be impatient. This is the mistake people make is like patience is a virtue, but the right types of patience is a virtue. I think you need to be patient when you're teaching a kid or when you're dealing with certain people in certain circumstances, but you actually should be impatient most of the time.
When you came to visit, I couldn't beat this level of Ninja Turtles. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I think you were, 9 or 8, and you just sat down and you didn't beat it for me. You tried to explain it, and you watched me fail like a ton of times. You wouldn't let me leave the room until I beat the level.
Oh, that's funny.
And but you did it in a really nice way, but it was just like my first experience with you and that.
My dad was a really great teacher, and I think one of the other things I learned from him that was really important is you can't trick people, but you have to like show them what they're good at, and you have to show them what they actually are good at, and you have to actually learn well enough what they're doing and where they are, and then you have to build on whatever competence they have or whatever thing they're good at, even if it's only a small thing, and you build from that onto more because you actually build based on giving people confidence and really giving them optimism. And this is I guess it's going back to the American Optimist show, which I do. I think helping others learn how to be optimistic.
This is probably one of your superpowers is figuring out what it is that people are actually good at and helping kind of optimally set their path, right? And make sure that they succeed in the best way possible. I think J.D. Ross, who was one of the founders of Open Door, recently tweeted about your ability to find talent, right? So do you have a framework for actually trying to figure out which talent is good versus bad, or is it a gut feeling thing? How have you gone about this throughout your life?
This is always one of those things that because I understand it, I think I could be much better at it. Obviously, Palantir was ranked #1 for a while in talent, and I helped hire a lot of the first couple hundred people there. And I think he was tweeting about Adipar, which we got a lot of good people. There's different types of talent in the world. Probably from working with Peter Thiel, I'm a little bit too skewed towards IQ type talent, but I think that's really, really important for building companies and succeeding. There's different types of technology talents. There's different types of human intelligence. I probably have people around me who are much better than me technologically. I have people around me who are much better than me at human intelligence. But I think hopefully I'm good enough at both of them to really understand the greats. That was one of the big insights I always like to cite Alex Karp on, right? Is you have to be within 2 standard deviations of a skill to appreciate that skill. I think maybe because I'm good enough at a few of these different talents, even if I'm not the best at any of them, I can appreciate who the very best in the world are and can work to bring them in and help build things,
When you were a little kid, you were already negotiating with your mom and dad about weird stuff. Like you were negotiating about when you could eat your dessert and if you got certain grades.
I don't think that's too weird. I think kids probably debate about when to get to eat their dessert all the time. That's like a normal thing.
I think you were so young when you started doing that I can't imagine Aiden, having a treatise about, when he should be eating dessert.
The best stories about when I was young come from our grandmother, but yeah.
Like which one?
Well, our grandmother passed away last year at 103, so Aaron and I are cousins, and she would always, I think, embarrass me and annoy Aaron by constantly telling stories. So there's quite a few of them. I don't know if we need to recount all of them here right now, but the one that she would recount most often is she was a teacher, and she brought me in as a 4-year-old. And I went to a math class with her, and I got to be in front of the math class, and she started asking me lots of interesting and difficult questions, and that was an entertaining time. And I remember also then going to see a plane nearby that we sat in where we were on the ground, but the altimeter said it was like 3,000 feet, and I was really confused. And I asked her, "Is that because we're way above sea level?" And I remember, so as a 4-year-old, I was first starting to be aware of a lot of these interesting things.
That is extremely young to be aware of that kind of stuff. When you were in high school, did you have confidence that you would one day be a successful person? And did you have a vision of what that might look like already, even as a 14, 15-year-old?
It's funny because as far as I can recall, I was extremely socially awkward outside of my friend group in high school. But I guess maybe other people are too or something. I'm not sure how this works.
I think everyone felt like they were socially awkward.
I think you're like hyper aware of things that you shouldn't be, maybe, and then it's probably like too risk averse socially. That's how these things are. But
I thought you were cool, but maybe that's because you were 4 or 5 years older than me.
Yeah, I was old enough that you didn't notice. It's no, it's definitely super awkward. Not that I'm not now, but much more so. I've always been one of the very best at everything I had to do. So I was like, I got, not only was valedictorian, but I was just like everything came a little bit easier to me, and I had lots of smart friends, and we had all sorts of ideas about what to do, and I've always been just very confident. So it's maybe a little bit obnoxious, but yeah, I always kind of knew I'd be running the world.
And so you saw yourself basically where you currently are.
I didn't know how the world worked nearly as well. So maybe as a 13, 14-year-old, I saw all these broken things, and I read a lot of documents from the founders of America because I was very interested in our country and why it stood out and why it was so different and so much more successful. If you just analyze it, it's just so much better. Really kind of took in the values of the Enlightenment and the values of the founding of our country. And I saw as they were breaking things, and I saw as things were not going correctly, that we'd probably have to have some kind of revolution, because that's what Thomas Jefferson suggested we should have. And so I thought, well, I guess we have to lead a revolution, but that seems really messy and hard. So I started to study how to do this. And of course, that probably wasn't the right thing to do then. It was probably better to actually build all these companies and create all these things instead. But it's still very interested in fixing our government, yes.
When I talked about your future success, you first brought up the fact that you felt socially awkward. You don't love this story, and we can edit this out if you don't want it to be in this podcast. You told me a story about when you were 12 or 13 years old, and you had this crush on a girl at school, and you came to school with like a purple shirt on.
Oh, this is sixth grade. I think I must have been 11.
Yeah, well.
Listen, I was a little overweight as a 5th and 6th grader. I'm not sure we need to talk about this very much, but it's probably something healthy about being like a little bit like socially ostracized or something that makes you hopefully like more understanding of others and able to get along with others, especially in the technology world. But yeah, no, I was probably, I was still a decent athlete, but I was overweight, and when I was wearing a purple shirt, the girl I liked told me I looked like Barney, so that wasn't very nice.
And that memory obviously stuck with you, and you got into really good shape.
I did get into really good shape a couple of years later.
Yeah, and that's when you also got your first. Well, you were always a really good student, but you became extremely directed, from what I understand. Like when you went to Stanford, you once told me that you kind of had an idea of who you'd seek out as potential mentors once you got there. How did you figure that out?
I think it's like really easy to try to claim we just like planned everything, and you obviously have biases, but I think there's like a lot more luck in a lot of these things. Like obviously I was lucky to have extreme competence and ability, but then like who you actually meet and you share values with, have interests with. Yeah, you can. I mean, I think in general, the advice I'd give to like 17, 18-year-olds going to school is to use that position to try to reach out and get to know successful people who are doing things they're interested in and who might share values with them, and try to find ways that can be helpful to them. And that's the sort of thing I was doing.
So you got to Stanford, and that's exactly what you did. Obviously, you had your own libertarian leanings, and that's why you wanted to go write for the Stanford Review, but that also connected you to people like Peter Thiel. Do you remember kind of meeting him for the first time and what that was like?
Yeah, I probably met him in the context of a Stanford Review dinner or two. And Peter liked to debate topics regarding economics and finance and history. And, I'd read a lot of books and had a lot of strong opinions on these things. I remember actually after meeting him, I don't think he would remember that. I remember the very first time I met him as a freshman, I applied to go work at PayPal. And I ended up meeting Max and having something we drew up on the whiteboard where I was trying to solve a problem. And I ended up arguing with Max about it. And they didn't end up hiring me, which I was disappointed by, and then I tried again next year, and they hired me the next year.
And you were an intern at PayPal before PayPal became really, really successful, right?
Yeah, it was pretty obvious it was going to be successful at the time because you had obviously Peter Thiel and Max Levchin started Infinity, and then Elon Musk had started X and his friends, and the companies merged together, and so you had like a ton of talented people there. And so for me, just even at the time having some sort of eye for talent and understanding who was competent, there's just so many competent people going there that it seemed like an obvious place to try to work at. I remember I hired a few different friends to work on projects for them as well and stuff. So there was, because I'd bring in other talent even back then.
Well, what's remarkable about that time is you mentioned some of the names, but you omitted people like David Sachs, Luke Nosek. Like there were just a bunch of people that were
David
part of
was a COO. Yeah, Luke Kinkenny started it with Peter. Reid Hoffman was there. There's probably 16 really famous companies came out of it. The guys just started YouTube, right? So there's all sorts of things.
They call it like the PayPal mafia or whatever. But what's really funny to me is that you came in as a student. It's kind of like being a writer in the writer's room during the best times of SNL, like when Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, Chris Farley, and everyone was there. And you're like Conan O'Brien coming in
as a young kid watching and learning from it.
Yeah. Do you remember how they perceived you then and how you perceived them?
I was a kid. No, I was a kid. I wasn't important at all. Like when you're 17 or 18 and 19, I guess, working as an intern at this place. I think the first thing they had me do is it's a big company at this point, right? And no one knows who the hell I am. That don't matter. I think they had me trying to help set up the PeopleSoft installation under like the CFO's office, which was terrible, by the way. It's like the worst thing. It's very funny. The guy who was CEO at the time is now my neighbor in Woodside. Is a very nice guy. But good God, those things, I think they're purposely designed so you have to like hire consultants to be able to set them up. It's a nightmare. I was going to quit because I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. And my dad convinced me not to quit, which was good. It would have looked bad to quit. I probably wouldn't have ended up working with them all. Yeah. I used to watch Conan O'Brien. It's been a long time since I've seen his stuff. He was really good.
He had a great show. I don't know if you know why I was making the Conan O'Brien reference, but during
because I'm Irish.
You're half Jewish. He's full Irish. He's like 110% Irish. It looks like, at least.
I'm pretty Irish. I'm not redheaded, but I'm pretty Irish.
Yeah, but your mom is like also 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. No, but the reason I was making the Conan parallel is because he was just a lowly writer that no one knew about, and then he became one of the greats himself. And that's kind of what you did with your subsequent founding of Palantir, and then Adipar and 8VC and all these other things you've done. He was a writer at SNL, Simpsons, and then he had his own show.
I think that's actually a very common pattern. Is these groups of extreme talent attract other people with potential and actually help you grow a lot faster than you would otherwise, kind of watching them and learning from them.
How did you guys come up with the idea for Palantir?
PayPal was losing, several $1 million a month to various types of fraud, and there's all sorts of different ways they had to build investigative tools, basically, so to help people search through the data. So it turns out AI, even now, it was not perfect, but back then, of course, wasn't even close. And you need to have people involved in the data along with, the machine figuring things out. Like, what's the person good at? What's the machine good at? You had all sorts of Russian mafia, Chinese mafia screwing around with PayPal, and then you had to start work with various people from the FBI and Secret Service to get the bad guys. And, I actually was very interested in that world, and I spent some extra time with those guys. And, Peter basically was seeing this after 9/11, saying, like, shouldn't we be able to take some of lessons we learned there and to build something to help the government, be a little bit less incompetent at how it's using data and how it's trying to get bad guys. And, the product was fully designed early on by Stephen Cohen and I as co-founders. We spent a summer with some of our smartest friends, some of the people you mentioned, mapping things out. And we, people thought it was pretty crazy at the time. Obviously, these kids trying to show the CIA and NSA and FBI and National Counterterrorism Center what the hell they should be doing. But Peter believed in us and supported us to his credit, and kind of gave us a lot of rope to run.
Before you started Palantir, our grandmother, who we call Bubbe, was worried about you being an entrepreneur. I think she wanted you to go to grad school, if I remember correctly. Do you remember the conversations you had with her at the time? And with, I think your mom too, actually, was on her side.
I think everyone in that generation, especially, so our Bubbe was born in 1920. Dad and mom were born in, late 40s, early 50s. And they come from a generation where their parents were, lower middle class effectively and really struggling to get by through the Depression. And, if you go back to Bubbe's parents, they were like getting like harassed and in some cases killed in pogroms and stuff in Eastern Europe. So you basically had a very risk-averse mindset built in. It's back to what we were talking about with the discover versus defend framework. And a lot of people are stuck in that defend framework. And the best thing you could possibly do is just get whatever advanced degree, tie it to whatever kind of safe job of being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever else that's like as safe as possible, and have security for your family. And it makes sense where they were coming from. If you think of the mindset of our ancestors from 100 years ago or even from 50 years ago, this is the world they're moving out of. You wanted security, and I really respect that. And yes, everyone wanted me to get a PhD. I thought it was a big mistake not to get a PhD. I was very lucky to be in a world in Silicon Valley where I saw there's actually just a ton of other opportunity, both in finance and tech, that I was going to learn a lot more engaging those opportunities than I was in going to grad school.
Do you have any advice for kids that are in that position with their parents? Because obviously I agree with you. I understand the perspective of Bubbe and why she was the way she was, but doing something against her wishes was very difficult. And till she was 103, right? She was with it till the very end. So do you have any advice to people like me and other kids who may not have your level of success in communicating with that generation?
Well, I was always her favorite, so I got to do whatever I wanted. Sorry.
Should we tell the story about? Okay,
I
so
want to make you feel bad, Aaron.
No, it's a great story. I brought my wife, Mainsha, to come meet her for the first time. We went to her synagogue, and all these old people at her synagogue were coming up to say hi to her, and she was nearly 100 years old at the time. And one old lady shuffled up, and she said, "Oh my God, is this the grandson you always talk about?" And Bubbe immediately was just like, "No, this is not the grandson." Hilarious in hindsight, but in the moment, kind of soul crushing, but also hilarious.
She always loved you, Aaron.
That was a huge hit at the funeral. That story. I was in high school, and I remember you were meeting with all these big DC agencies, and we have an aunt that lives in DC, and we were there for Passover. And you earlier that day had been meeting with, I think, the top people at some.
I probably told you they were the top people. I was probably 22 and didn't know what I was doing. Yeah.
The early hubris of early success. What was it like being that young and having, because you had early success at Palantir and Clarium, and so you had access to money. You were very, very young. What kind of growing pains did you have to go through in maturity, sort of?
Well, the first time I was ever going to get like a huge amount of money, like we made, obviously it's like really cool to get $500,000 million that changes your life in a lot of ways. The first time I was going to have like a huge amount of money, I think it was when I was 25, and I was the top trader at Clarium, and we were having a really good year. I think in the middle of 2008, we were shorting the banks and shorting finance, seeing what was going to happen, and trying to warn people ahead of time. And we were up like, I think 100% or something in this multi-billion-dollar fund, and a little piece of that was mine. So there was some bonus. It was, I don't know if it was 50 or 60 million or whatever it would have been if we'd stopped at that point. And we ended up not stopping, and we ended up getting some trades wrong and ending up the year almost flat. And my account I turned off or something because I was terrified what was going on. This is the world was blowing up, and so I ended up a lot. And Peter still owed me a bunch of money, but thank goodness, because thinking I was going to get the $60 million bonus or at least something close to it, I think I'd probably already spent 10 or 15 of it on crazy, just on crazy apartments and crazy trips. And it's I think it's actually really, really healthy in some ways to go through thinking you have a lot and then not having it. Because it kind of builds a certain humility, and it kind of builds a certain caution, and it's just like kind of makes sure you like really double check yourself. And so I think if I hadn't gone through that, some of the other success later would have been a lot more damaging. Because I see when people have really big success that it does just naturally, if you're a human being, go to your head in different ways, and so you have to kind of be ready to be thoughtful and to really analyze yourself. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be perfect every time I do it now, that I'm able to handle it perfectly now. But you definitely kind of, especially as a young person, you learn from having it and then not having it.
You went through like the young NBA player early success thing. I think J.J. Redick recently talked about this on his podcast, where he overspent on a bunch of properties early on in his career, and he He was lucky enough to have a long enough career to make that money back, but he made a lot of very poor financial decisions when he was a kid.
I think it's normal that kids will first get a lot of money and make bad financial decisions. It's almost impossible not to. And also, it's not just like the bad decisions, it's like the level of hubris. I really think like if you go to 2008 when we were shorting and we were up so much and we had modeled all these really smart, complicated things and we were right and we were just going around to everyone in finance explaining to them why we were making so much money and they were all just taking notes from us. And it's like, yeah, we are the gods of finance. You are all beneath us and like nothing can stop us. And it's very interesting. Like the Greeks believe that like gods give men pride. The more successful they are, the more successful a great man is, the more pride they pile upon him until he's smashed by it. So it's almost like this like fate to be like smashed by their pride and taken down by it. And I think there's something very true to that, at least in what I've seen in the real world for me and people around me. When you're having great success, it eventually you kind of get taken down by it. And so you got to be really careful.
You've had a lot of success since Palantir. It seems like a lot of your story continues to be tied to Palantir over and over and over again. Obviously, in the media, it's the most famous thing you've done. Is that annoying?
Well, from a hubris perspective, you mean? I mean, of course, whenever you do something big, that's what people are going to talk about. It's funny because I was really only at Palantir full time for 7 or 8 years. And I'm still an advisor now, which mostly means I'm friends with the guys running it, but I try to be helpful to them in various ways. And obviously I've started several companies that have been valued at over $1 billion since then. I've started lots of other things in the nonprofit and for-profit world that are having huge impact. Have other big exits, like we just sold OpenGov, of course, for $1.8 billion, which was started as a mission-driven company, which is pretty cool to have something worth more than $1 billion. You started to fix things. People assume that if you're tied to something really big, that's just like the most notable fact about you, and they don't do any more work. Which is a little, it is what it is, though. I mean, I don't need everyone to know how great I am. I think when you're working on something you're trying to get done, though, it is useful for them to understand that there's something else going on here than just one company.
Do you have a specific story or moment in your career that was that hubris check for you?
Well, that was the thing we were talking about earlier when in 2008 when we kind of went up and down. I think it was a good check.
Do you have any other kind of stories throughout your career that were?
No, I'm perfect otherwise.
Well, any notable instructive failures?
Wish was very frustrating. I learned a lot about doing business in China, obviously. We started investing in that in 2010, back when it seemed like a very normal thing to try to work between China and the U.S. And also learned about doing business with people who don't treat you respectfully and whatnot, and different situations there. But yeah, there's always things that work and that don't work. And I think part of what makes you like a good entrepreneur or a good investor is every time something doesn't work, you say, what could I have done better? Where did I mess up? What could I have figured out? And it's very easy in life, like no matter what's happening, to see how you blame China purely, or blame the person running it, or blame whoever else around me screwed something up. And it's true, because usually there are other things that are screwing it up. But the real question, I think, for any of these things when they don't work is what could you have done? What could you have figured out if you had been like really, really wise? What could your intuition have shown you to do earlier ahead of time? And there are lots of good answers to those things, whether it's with Wish, investing at the very beginning and having it go up to being worth $18 billion and down to totally crashing, later on. Like obviously there's different things I could have done. So yeah, no, you constantly, in venture capital, we have a low loss ratio relative to other funds. I've been on top talent. I understand how big industries work. My team is really well connected, both in talent and in these big industries, and we have lots and lots of things going very well. But you constantly have things that don't work. That's the nature of it. You have 30 big investments per fund, and if you're one of the best in the world, you're still losing on 20% of those. And so the question is like for each time, what could you have done better? And listen, you can't always predict someone's going to have a mental health illness. You can't always predict that there's another company you didn't know about that's going to come out of nowhere that's going to be better. It doesn't mean that you can always say you could have done better, but in general, there's things you could have done better.
So my wife, Mainsha, is from the Netherlands. A couple summers ago, we were just hanging out with a bunch of her friends at a dinner, and one of her friends brought up a tweet from a crazy American guy about Pete Buttigeg and how lame it was that he was taking paternity leave. And they had no idea that I was related to you. But they showed me this crazy American person named Joe Lonsdale in the tweet. You're pretty strong voiced on social media. Do you have any social media regrets?
I think in general, our society is skewed in a way where it's really too focused on safetyism, too focused on not being offended. I think it's actually really good for people to be offended more, and it's really good for people to have their bubbles burst more. And sometimes the only way people share and see ideas is if they're shared really strongly. And I actually don't think it's a good overall to worry about not offending people. I think that's actually like this weird, fake, broken thing on our age. Like you don't want to actually physically hurt people, But I think I totally believe in the sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me framework. And I think the whole kind of psychological thing of like encouraging weakness and feeling people to be weak and feeling people to be hurt by words is loser talk. And it's like terrible for our society. It's made our society much weaker. It's like reverse cognitive behavioral therapy, if you want to go into the details of it in terms of like teaching them how to be weak. So I actually think that more people should basically like find ways of just being really strong with things that are true and bursting people's bubbles, and that's fine. Now that said, if you're actually like in person working on things, like there's no reason to be an asshole. But if you want a point to get shared and have 21 news stories written about it, you probably have to write it strongly. Like in terms of regrets, like I have like tried to like argue with one or two trolls once and then got taken out of context and ended up offending people about as if I was saying something that I wasn't actually saying, and that's just very frustrating to me because I think we do live in an age where like people are really eager to find examples of bad guys like attacking things in ways that so they can like go after them. And so I do think you have to be a little bit careful to not have like pointless arguments on social media. But listen, I think that there's nothing wrong with paternity leave. I think that taking time off with your kids to support your wife is obviously a good thing. I think if you're an important man in an important position, you have duty to society, you don't need 6 months of paternity leave, which is what I said. You don't need 6 months in a row. I think it's actually not even the ideal way to take paternity leave. I think it's terrible for your work and for anything important you're doing, and you shouldn't do it. And frankly, I think you are a loser if you do that and you're like letting down your work. So, and you know what? Everyone who attacked me actually agrees because none of them actually did take 6 months. And so it was a debate that had like derived from the fact that Buttigeg wasn't actually doing his job because literally things in the U.S. were breaking because the Department of Transportation had like totally failed while he was on leave. And like, no, if you're on leave and something's breaking, come back and fix it. That's your it's your duty, basically, you know?
I was incredibly frustrated as well. And I think you said the thing that we were all thinking. And it's one of those examples. Elon Musk does that a lot. You guys are attacked a lot. I know that your ethos is sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But it must hurt when you're attacked.
I think it can be distracting when you're attacked. I think it could be, I don't know if it hurts.
So when you're going through a creative dry spell, how do you get your energy up again? Like your version of writer's block.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do a lot of different types of things, some of which are creative. I write a lot. I have a Substack that only has about 10,000 subscribers, but I think they're probably good subscribers.
They're the best subscribers.
The best. You know, I have
the most manly subscribers.
I have really talented people who help me with these things as well, but it does have to come from me being passionate about something and caring about something and working on it. And that it's a really good question. You know, I find that when I have more open time, I have more creativity. And so sometimes a lot of the block for me in my life comes from I have too many duties of too many things in a row. And if you don't have free time to sit and think and ponder, I like to smoke a cigar when I sit and think and relax. And I think something like that is probably really good for creativity for me. Try to go cold plunge, try to work out. Sometimes after a workout, I'll get creativity, but really having open time is what matters.
What do you hope for your children, for their futures? You have 4 daughters, to be clear, and you might have another kid coming.
You hope your kids get to find things they're passionate about and that they love, and they get to work hard at them. And you hope that they are safe and protected, and that they get to have lots of joy in their lives. And it's. For me, a lot of the work I do in policy and politics is that I'm really nervous our civilization is heading towards something where it just gets completely broken, completely dysfunctional over the next 20 or 30 years. It's like the debt's obviously a huge issue. The fact that we can't rebuild bridges, we can't rebuild infrastructure, with the fact that we have all this messy traffic, that there's everything gets more and more broken, the fact that there's airplane parts falling out of the sky, et cetera, et cetera. And I realize some of that's exaggerated maybe right now, but there's a lot of incompetence that seems to be encroaching, a lot of decay that's encroaching, and it seems to be tied to some of this really bad philosophy and really bad policy. So for me, a lot of this is like, if I can contribute in a way where I could fight to keep our country safe, keep out invaders, bring in competent people from around the world to make us great, but not let in like random criminal gangs that are hitting houses in my neighborhood. Have people where you put the bad guys in jail and not let the bad guys cause problems. These are all things I could do to protect my daughters and to help protect our country for our kids and our grandkids. Like that's probably about the best I could do on that score. And then in terms of their own lives, I don't think you want to be too controlling or to have too much of a vision for them. I think you want to inspire them to find what they're great at and to be optimistic and to be in explore mode,
Yeah. I've seen you kind of encourage that by putting on princess outfits with them and doing face makeup and stuff.
I have not put on princess outfits with them.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it myself.
That's not true.
So why Texas? Why did you move your family from California to Texas?
Well, I wrote an obnoxious article in the Wall Street Journal about it.
Why was it obnoxious? Come on.
I wrote a whole article about this in the Wall Street Journal when we did it, which is slightly obnoxious to write an article in the Wall Street Journal, which for a move. But it's just the whole philosophy of California government is just completely corrupted and broken. It's very inefficient. My wife and I are pretty aligned. We both really believe in like liberty and competence, and just seeing how they're like spending the money in California on so much corruption that's causing so much damage, that's encouraging so many bad things. It's just unethical for me to continue to pay tens of millions of dollars into that state.
But why Texas and not Florida?
Well, I think Texas and Florida are the two best run states in the country. I like both governors a lot. I know both governors pretty well. Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis are, both do great work. Texas here in Austin is probably the best tech center between those two states. So I build companies, I create lots of things. And so I think working out of Austin with the talent here, we're building a really cool defense company here called Neurolink, which is teaching the Navy how to use AI and weaponizing. We're going to be able to build thousands of small vessels to help the Navy step up its game against our adversaries. Doing lots of really big things in healthcare here, have all sorts of other companies in town. My brother Jonathan moved here first, is doing a really great company in real estate technology. So there's just a lot of really cool things happening here. Is the right place to build. And my other sense is that, again, like being a fighter for the future of our country, if Texas falls, if Texas is controlled by the illiberal nonsense, if Texas goes, far left the same way California has, I think our nation is in really serious trouble at that point. I don't like to make like absolute proclamations about things being done. I think we're going to keep fighting for our country no matter what, because that's what we do. But I really think we have to hold Texas. A lot of my friends, instead of going to Texas or Florida, they left. They went to Switzerland. They went to London. They went to Singapore. They moved around the world. Some of them are moving multiple places around the world, kind of traveling itinerant billionaires, having succeeded now. And that's not for me. I moved to Texas to fight for our country.
Do you think that you could ever run for office, or are you too competent to be a politician?
I think we definitely do need more competent politicians. But, Aaron, right now, with the Cicero Institute, we have teams in 20 states. We're close with a lot of really great governors, a lot of great legislators. We create laws very openly. It's all on the website. It's a 501c3 and a 501c4 for the lobbying part. We create laws. We have a whole system of how to teach everyone what's going on. To get a law passed, you need a sponsor in the House. You need a sponsor in the Senate. This is states. And you need the governor's office, the governor, to align with it. And we've done this now. We're getting dozens of laws passed per year. We're putting back in accountability into areas.
What's an example of a Cicero accomplishment?
Governor DeSantis last month in March signed a homeless bill in Florida we'd been working on for a few years. We also got a part of it passed in Georgia with Governor Kemp as well the previous year, where we're basically trying a whole new framework that we think works a hell of a lot better than what's happening right now in San Francisco and LA and destroying those cities. Banning street camping, it's changing the incentives, it's auditing the homeless industrial complex, it's making sure the money's tied not towards this housing first thing, which doesn't work. It's like basically attracts people to the wrong things, and it's actually taking people who are mentally ill and on drugs and giving some of them who are connected to the right people homes, and it's giving them the wrong incentives to get those homes, and a lot of them are dying in the homes, and there's still a huge amount of them on the streets, and it doesn't work at all. So just like, what's the right way to work? What's the efficient way to do it? How do you spend the money not to create more homelessness, but to actually help people? So that's a really big accomplishment. Another one I'll give you is we're really helping with vocational schools. And I think it's really cool, actually. A lot of Gen Z right now is deciding to go and become machine shop workers again and, become plumbers and stuff we actually need for our society. And it pays really well. It's people living very good lives. And it turns out, though, that a lot of the vocational schools that states spend so much money on don't actually teach them the relevant skills. So it's I believe in vocational schools, but only if they're good. And so the question is, how do you fund a vocational school to make it good? And if you ask most politicians, well, we gave it $1 billion. I'm well, okay. You have $1 billion. What if the people running it are woke idiots and they're just throwing the money at Trans Visibility Day as opposed to actually teaching them goddamn skills? And so it turns out, instead of just how much money you're giving them, how about you have multiple vocational schools, and how about you fund each of them in competition for the ones that are getting students to come out with highest salaries? And so the key thing here is you choose a metric that's impossible to game. If the metric is graduation rate, they'll just graduate everyone. It doesn't help. But if the metric is the salary coming out of the school, then you can actually reward them for better results. And it turns out that if you reward people for results like that, it creates a form of accountability. It creates innovation because they compete. You actually end up getting twice as high salaries coming out of these schools when you do this. And we've done it in multiple states now.
That's awesome. Before October 7th, Elon Musk was accused of being anti-Semitic. And then October 7th happened. A lot of the way that we've been talking about anti-Semitism shifted. Obviously, a lot's different now. My mom went to dinner recently with a bunch of older Jewish ladies, and all of them across the political spectrum still just believed that Elon Musk is an anti-Semite. Why do you think these narratives, they stick so well? And obviously you're friends with him. what would you say to the people who say that he's anti-Semitic?
Well, Elon's obviously not anti-Semitic, and I think he works with a lot of really talented Jews. If anything, he'll tell you he's pro-Semitic. He's happy to come to Shabbat dinner. He's happy for his kids to be friends with Jewish kids. I think that the ADL has been a really important organization, the Anti-Defamation League, over the last 100 years to Jews, and a lot of us remember it fighting for Jews at really key times in our history. A lot of other nonprofits, places like the ADL that started off moderate left, ended up hiring some very radical, very far left components. And I think Elon and others were right to criticize a lot of what the ADL was doing very aggressively. And I've also criticized it very aggressively. Just because you're criticizing something for being broken doesn't mean you're criticizing Jews. But I think people have a really tough time in their minds when they don't fully see what the ADL was doing. And they just assume, oh, you must be anti-Semitic if you're against this pro-Jewish org. I think a lot of other people have also tried to characterize Elon that way because, Elon's taken some stances that have really pissed off people on the extreme liberal left. Which a lot of our media is part of and a lot of our nonprofits are part of. They do not like being attacked. They do not like no longer controlling, Twitter, no longer being able to censor their critics. And so, of course, they're angry at him. So, of course, they're going to try to smear him. I don't know. I think maybe because Henry Ford was an anti-Semite, which is definitely the case. 100 years ago, Henry Ford was probably not always the nicest guy. I think it's much easier to assume maybe Elon's the same or something like that just because they don't like his politics. But it's obviously a fake smear. And, it's one of those things anyone who really takes time to investigate can figure out the actual answer. I think most people these days, especially, frankly, I have to say, on the extremes, which is the extreme left, but also the extreme right, your job is just to go along with what you're told and not think for yourself and not go and investigate. And so this goes back to what we were talking about before with discover mode versus defend mode. A lot of people, they're in their tribes, they're in defend mode. What they're saying is based on what they're supposed to say. They're saying, what would other people expect me to say here? What do I believe is the thing I'm supposed to say? And so they might not even believe that about Elon, but they might believe they're supposed to say that. And unfortunately, that's what's driving a lot of how we act right now on both political extremes.
Dude, love you, man. Thank you for coming in here and taking time out of your insane schedule. I hope it wasn't too out of the way.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm glad to come here and talk to you about madness.
See, now you're a fan of the madness. So you get the theme now a little bit more.
I'm a fan of the madness.
Yeah, see, it works.